Looks like folks have started to join, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone again. Welcome to PMP Live. My name is Michelle, and I'm a bookseller with our Children and Teen Department. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are so excited for our YA panel as we delve into all things fantasy. Tonight, we celebrate The Cruelest Mercy by Natalie Mae, Prose by Lish McBride, Cats and Secrets and Shadow by Andrea Robertson, and Girls at the Edge of the World by Laura Brook Robson. So we're going to drop those links into the chat box to purchase the books. So if you don't already own a copy, you can definitely reserve yours today. You can also check out our website for other amazing books by the authors. Tonight, you can ask the authors questions by clicking Q&A located at the bottom of your screen. And you can also vote on your favorite questions. And at the end, we'll have time to go over some together. As always, please remember this is a creative, safe space. We ask that folks be respectful of one another in any questions and comments. Now, on to tonight's event. It is my pleasure to introduce critically acclaimed YA authors, Natalie Mae, Lish McBride, Andrea Robertson, and Laura Brook Robson. Natalie Mae, an ex-programmer and dark chocolate enthusiast, has written The Cruelest Mercy as the sequel to The Kinder Poison. Both received starred reviews from Kirkus. In The Cruelest Mercy, we find likable Zaru in the midst of high-stakes drama again, as she and Costa pursue the throne. When Natalie is not writing, she can be found wandering the Colorado wilderness with her family. Lish McBride, a former indie bookseller with an MFA from the University of New Orleans, prefers pie to cake. She has written several YA titles in addition to short stories. Her first book, Hold Me Closer, Necromancer, was honored as an ALA Best Book for Young Adults and won the Scandiuzzi Children's Book Award. Tonight we celebrate Curses, a rollicking retelling of Beauty and the Beast where Merritt has until her 18th birthday to break a beastly curse. Andrea Robertson, originally from Minnesota, now lives in California. She's the internationally best-selling author of the Nightshade series. Tonight we highlight Cast in Secrets and Shadow, the sequel to Forged in Fire and Stars. Ara has now become the loresmith, but she must unite the lore knights and secure the throne. Laura Brook Robson grew up in the mountains of Oregon and studied creative writing at Stanford. She currently lives in Australia, where she enjoys drinking too much coffee and swimming in places she's probably not supposed to swim. Girls at the Edge of the World, her debut novel, has already received praise and a starred review from Kirkus. In it, sparks fly as Natasha tries to save the royal flyers from the impending flood while Ella pursues revenge. And now I'm excited to dive in and hear from our authors. So to kick us off, I've asked each of our authors just to share with us a bit more what their book is all about. So let's see, Natalie, would you start us off?
Yeah, and I'm actually, because The Cruelest Mercy is a sequel, I don't want to spoil too many things. So I thought I'd just do kind of the pitch for The Kinder Poison, which is the first book. So that one is about a teenage girl who is chosen as the human sacrifice in a dangerous race across the desert between the king's three heirs. And there's a lot of magic, and it's kind of like an ancient Rome, Egypt, Greece setting, fantastical thing. There's humor and danger and magical horses, and there it is.
Great. Let's see, Lish, do you want to tell us about Curses next?
Sure. Curses is basically a gender-swapped Beauty and the Beast retelling, where our beauty character is named Tevin. He is a sort of ridiculously handsome con man who's been gifted with charm, and he is hired by Merritt, who is our Beast character, to help her pick the best match so she can break her curse. It's a fantasy. It's a romp. Like, it is not. There's nothing really deep and dark in that sense. Like, I wanted a book that was basically sort of like a candy-coated heart. And I feel like it's goofy. I mean, there's winged badgers and there's a dapper ostrich. And so I feel like that gives you a good game. If you're like, yes, that sounds great, it's probably the book for you. If you're sort of horrified, then maybe check out the other books on the panel.
Amazing. I love that candy-coated heart. Let's see, Andrea, would you like to tell us about either the current book, or I guess you can also do the first book, whichever.
Yeah, I'm in a similar position to Natalie, where Cast in Secrets and Shadows is the second book of a trilogy, and the first is Forged in Fire and Stars. And it is the story of Ara. Ara lives in a tiny mountain village, and ever since she can remember, she's been told that she has this destiny to become the loresmith, who is a blacksmith that crafts weapons blessed by the gods. And she's supposed to be able to use this ability to save her kingdom, which has been overtaken by a wicked empire known as the Vacan Empire. But by the time the book starts, Ara is 15 years old, and she does not believe that her destiny is real at all. She thinks she's just been, her tales have been spun to her whole life, and she's pretty cynical, and she's pretty angry and pretty angsty. And then she gets kidnapped by a pair of teenagers who claim to be the heirs to the throne of her kingdom, who want to take the kingdom back. And all of a sudden she realizes that maybe everything she was told was true. And she ends up going on a journey of discovery and danger and adventure to see if she can prove worthy to become the loresmith and take back the kingdom.
Very cool. All right. And Laura, would you like to round us off there?
Yeah, so Girls at the Edge of the World, which is my debut, is about Natasha, who is the lead flyer in a band of aerial silk performers in the palace. And she learns that a global flood is going to cover the entire world. And she thinks that her only chance for her own survival and for the other girls in her troupe is to marry the young, enigmatic king. Meanwhile, Ella, who is a new recruit to the Flyers, is after revenge and wants to kill the king for, she thinks, assassinating the girl she loved. And it's the story of how Natasha and Ella's plans get in the way of each other and how their relationship grows.
Very cool. All right, all of these are excellent. Well, now we're gonna just dive a little deeper into either the stories or your process as writers. So I think these kind of fall into, of course, our sci-fi or fantasy, maybe more so the world building was amazing for each of you. When you're writing a fantasy or a sci-fi novel, what comes easily to you? And is there anything that is maybe more difficult? Let's see. Does anyone want to kick us off? Or I know I see pondering faces there. Lish, do you have something in mind? Or
Easy. I don't know if anything's easy. I guess maybe building characters, just because I often have too many. And then my editor has to, like, each round go, okay, who can we cut down? So, and this cast is already huge, and the people that are, upset about it, it was worse. So I don't know. I really enjoy the world building part. I think trying to come up with like how the societies function, how they get from one place to another, how it works on a basic level is really entertaining. It can also be really frustrating because like you work so hard on it and then you turn it in and people read it and they're like, but this doesn't make any sense and that doesn't work. And why are there trains? And so you have to then go, well, fine, okay, it doesn't make sense, and go back again. And so I feel like for me, it happens in a lot of layers, trying to get all of that right. And on one hand, it's a lot of fun and very entertaining, but on the other, it can be really frustrating as you try to get it to function.
yeah, no, I can only imagine. But you mentioned a lot of characters. You did provide a cheat sheet, which I found very helpful. So the cast of characters in the beginning. So yes, there are a lot, but that is helpful, and you do get to know them as you go along. Let's see. When you're doing fantasy, what do you find easy? What's difficult? And let's see. Somebody else want to walk us through their take on it?
I mean, yeah, I'll go through. So kind of what comes easier to me is like just making up different kinds of magic, because I feel like I'm a person who just in everyday life is like, man, I wish I could just like teleport to go see this friend who is like 2,000 miles away. Or like, I don't want to get a stool to put that thing back up on the top of the fridge. Or like, I wish that person who was just rude to me would trip as they go up the stairs. Like, there's just so many practical uses for magic. So I feel like I'm just thinking about those things and like can put them in as I go. And then kind of what Lish said, what is also the most difficult, but also the most enjoyable is the world building. And I like to build my worlds a lot based on like real world cultures. So it's really, really fun, really fun to go and do that research into those cultures and to like make something new from it. But then I have to go do all of that research into those cultures and make all of those little details that make a world feel believable and real. But it's really rewarding to see how that all comes together.
Yeah.
I loved the magic in your book, Natalie. I just, and this isn't a spoiler, I don't think, but one of my favorite things you did in terms of like practical magic you wish you had was the listening scroll, where
Oh,
in the world where there's no such thing as email or cell phones, that you can reach someone across great distances by using this listening scroll. And I just thought that was so clever. And I was like, oh, that's just neat.
it's like my ancient text messaging. Yeah, thank you so much.
I too really love creating magic, and I prior to becoming a full-time novelist, I was a historian, and so I really love really digging deep in terms of politics and religion in the worlds that I build. And I'd say sometimes what's hard for me is letting go of all that, because I tend to write hundreds of pages of stuff that never makes it into the book. And I love doing that, but another part of me is like, do I spend too much time doing this? I really need to just focus on the plot and get things moving along here. But I can't help that. I just love doing that part of it. I also love having a big cast of characters, and I often find that I have to remember not to get more invested in the subplots than the main plot, because I like to chase after subplots like nothing else.
Awesome.
Yeah, similar to Andrea, I feel like when I'm writing, I'm constantly trying to justify why I'm spending so much time making something up. And so I find that I think a lot about the stories that shaped me and what I hope my story might do. So I'm also really interested in like religion and history and fairy tales. There's a lot of fables in my book, and I would have written the entire book as just like fables and sections from their various religious texts if I could, because that feels so rich and fulfilling to me.
That's awesome. I know basically I felt transported for each of yours. The layers there, you mentioned governments, the religions of research you guys did, from, I don't know, even just clothes that can attack you with Natalie, and we're using mirrors and illusions to communicate, all sorts of fun fantasy elements for sure. So we've started to talk a bit about your craft then and how you develop worlds. Could you walk us through a day in the life for you, or your general writing process then? Getting a little bit more into the craft. Is there any, are you a morning person? Do you have to lay it all out, or do you let the twists and turns come as you will? Let's see. Natalie, you want to start us off?
Oh, sure. So I can't really do a day in the life right now because my day-to-day schedule is super, super hectic. I have a 5-year-old in the house who is not in school right now, but she has like dance and soccer. And then I have grandparents that come twice a week to help me. So I'm not even going to try to say like what kind of routine I have, because I don't have one. I just write when I don't have her. So yeah, but then with writing process, like when I'm starting a book, I always start with plot. So I'll always start with like a what if question. So with Kinder Poison, it is, what if you were chosen as a human sacrifice? And then I'll build characters from there. And often, your hero is your person who has the most to lose from like this big problem falling apart in your book. The most to lose, obviously, from being a human sacrifice. So of course, it's enough already that she might lose her life. But then I also wanted to build, okay, maybe there's also people who rely on her back at home, that she wouldn't be there to help anymore. And then of course, your antagonist is going to be the person who has the most to gain from your hero failing. And then you can start to build out, okay, well, why does he need to so desperately win? And what's all of the motivation behind that? And from there, then I can do my world building. And with Kinder Poison, of course, when we're talking about human sacrifice, it only made sense to me that this would take place in like an ancient time period where sacrifice like that would be more acceptable or even like sacred and revered. And then I just kind of keep building the book up from there.
Well, that's encouraging though, in terms of your day-to-day life. So you can do it. You don't have to have a routine. It's chaos. Whatever works for you. So that's awesome. Let's see. Anybody else have anything that's springing to mind there? And did anything surprise you when you're, doing the writing process for this particular story too? Do your characters ever take you a different way than you saw it? Or how do you go about crafting? let's see, Laura, this is your first debut novel. How did this one come about for you?
Yeah, so it was my first, obviously my debut, but it was actually the seventh or eighth book that I ever wrote. I wrote a lot just growing up, trying to kind of experiment and see how it went. And I started writing, doing NaNoWriMo when I was in high school. And so that was always my process, was just write a draft as fast as I possibly could. And so as I was revising Girls at the Edge of the World, that was kind of how I revised. I would just start with a blank page and then write a new draft as fast as I could. And that's not what I do anymore. And that really surprised me, kind of the give and take of working with a team. I love my agent and the editors that I worked with. And I was so eager to please them that I was like, fine, I'll just write a new draft because you said that this one thing was wrong. And they told me, no, you don't need to do that. And so kind of building up a new process as I learn more about my writing and what I want to write. And also just as I try to juggle more things, I think it's been a really good time constraint to not just start a new draft every time I want to fix something.
For sure. Let's see. Liz, how do all those characters come about? Let's see. Do you ever, how did you consider gender and identity when you're building them? Like for Beauty and the Beast here, we basically have, Merritt is more kind than I thought, given that she's going to have this beastly curse. She's trying to take care and make sure everyone's got access to the flower and has that relief from their curse. And we've got this con artist who's beautiful. So did you always want to do a play on inner and outer beauty there, or like what inspired this retelling, I guess, Beauty and the Beast style?
I mean, like I don't know if anything. I'm sort of, I think, along with Natalie, where it's more of a considering that kind of question of what if I did this thing, and then what are the characters that would be the most difficult for, in a sense. And I think I just have been thinking about fairy tales because that's the kind of thing that I think about when I'm sort of mindlessly doing something. And I started thinking about Beauty and the Beast because it's my favorite fairy tale, even though it's horrifically problematic, like many fairy tales. And thinking about like, well, what would happen if you flipped it? Because I think there's a lot of pressure. I mean, not just on young women, to be pretty and to be pleasant and to be, all those things. But the flip side of it is like there's also that pressure for boys. And what does that mean? And what does it mean when they step outside their rigid, gender stricture? And then what if the world I had maybe had different rules to begin with? And as for Merritt being kind, I think a lot of that stemmed from the fact that I have a penchant for sort of pragmatic female leads. Like there's nothing I like more than a girl that's going to go in there and get it done, essentially. And she takes her power seriously. Like she knows she has a lot of people depending on her friends, but also her people. And even though she's young, I think that we sometimes discount the youth, that they aren't capable and can't do many great things, which they obviously can do. I think, especially the last few years, we've seen a lot of that. I wish I could say that I had a great process to share with you, because we were talking about process. I'm a pantser. I cannot plot to save my life. And when I pitch a book, it sounds basically like disconnected images and nonsense. Like it's not kind of like, hey, I was thinking about doing this Beauty and the Beast, but also there's this ostrich. And also I want to do this thing with a frog. And my agent is used to it by now. And he's like, sure, just like, let's see what you can do. And it might be why I have to revise a lot, but I can't, I don't even know where the story's going to go. Like I have to wait and have it tell me. And unfortunately, that does mean that a lot of characters pop up. Which I find deeply entertaining, but is confusing to everyone else. So yeah, it's a mess. The process is a mess, is what I'm saying.
Well, I still think that's encouraging to everyone out there that might be an aspiring author, that you don't have to have it all figured out then. And there are different ways to go about it, whether you're plotting ahead of time or figuring it out as you go along and discovering characters. Andrea, how's your writing process like?
I am definitely chaotic neutral when it comes to my writing process alignment. I write out of order. I cannot outline for the life of me. I tried really, really hard with several books, including this one, and it inevitably just crashes and burns. My brain. I also see a lot of pictures. I I think of scenes, and I basically find that I am the most successful as a writer if I write the scene that's in my mind, rather than if I try to force, well, this is where the next thing that should happen is here. If I'm not there creatively, I will just struggle and struggle and struggle with that place. Whereas if I jump around and then figure out later how to fit all the pieces together, I find it works much better for me. I tend to know, because I mostly write trilogies. And so I tend to know how, I know the beginning. I also start with a what if question. And in the case of Forge and Fire and Stars and Cast in Secrets and Shadows, it was, I knew I wanted a blacksmith, because I was like, well, what about a female blacksmith? But then the second question was, what if the hero of the story can't fight? Because in my other series, the heroines were a classic kind of fighter image, the young woman who is into like using her fists or her swords or her claws, however it was. But in the case of Ara, her magical gift of crafting these incredible weapons is lost if she ever uses violence against anyone. She can defend herself, but she can never be the aggressor. And I was really curious to explore the idea of what does it mean if you have a hero who's only able to defend, if they cannot go on the offense. And so that was what I was interested in exploring with her. And then the characters, again, tend to really lead me off on all sorts of subplots along the way. And I always know what I'm heading towards, but I don't know how I'm going to get there.
That's awesome. Do you end up weaving them together at the end then?
Oh,
You've
yeah.
got these scenes that, okay, you're doing them as they
Yeah,
come to
I
you.
usually, I would say when I'm about 2/3 of the way through the book, I start being able to really pull the pieces together. And then I spend a lot of time working on transitions, which is just so much fun.
We write out of
Well,
order. I could never be able to write out of order. That would like
I know I know the only other
amazing.
person who I've heard does it that way is Diana Gabaldon. And I'm not asked her that, I just heard it from somebody else that she writes out of order. But my brain has always been absolutely wild. And so that's my process.
no, it's fascinating. Does anybody else know like the ending before they get there?
I usually
I didn't
do.
used to.
Okay.
I do now.
Yeah.
No, that's super interesting. I feel like there were so many strong female characters in these, and I love that so many of them have this humor to them. You know, there's either a dark humor or a subtle humor or a witty humor, and you guys just kind of weave that in. Do you always, I guess we're going a little off script here, but do you always try to have, some sort of lighter element like humor and, weaved within these intense action storylines? Is that intentionally done, or does it just kind of come up naturally as you create these characters, I guess?
For me, it's a little bit of both, because on the one hand, I do tend to have my stories tend to have a lot of violence, because they're usually a lot about oppression and conflict and people finding their way out of those situations. But I really love wit and banter, and it's kind of a dead giveaway in my books. If there's a couple who are going back and forth like Beatrice and Benedict in Much Ado About Nothing all the time, they're going to get together. and I feel like it's pretty obvious that way, so I don't feel like that's a huge spoiler. But I'm really into bantering romance. I'm also really into kind of dry, sarcastic humor, and that tends to come out. I don't know what character is going to have it. They just kind of appear as that. They have that kind of delivery. But I really, really like humorous exchanges, and I don't ever want my readers or myself as a writer to feel like it just gets worse and worse and worse, and you just really want to kind of go hide under the covers for 3 hours after reading the book. I mean, I like having moments like that in my book, but I don't like the entire book to be just brutality.
No, that is fair. Yeah, sorry, Lish, were you gonna go?
Yeah, it was for me. I think there's an element of both planned and sort of happens anyway. And I think planned, humor is a great coping mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think especially when you're young and you've gone through a lot of trauma,
Yeah.
like I do think it sort of creates a sort of gallows humor.
Mhm.
My mom was an ICU nurse, and my dad's a doctor, and so there was a lot of gallows humor in my family. And so the worse our situation gets, the funnier we get, which is kind of horrifying in lots of ways, because then we just seem wildly inappropriate pretty much. But I think also, even if I don't want to write humor, it's ground in there somewhere. 'Cause I used to actually routinely get in trouble in college for I was terrible at scholarly tone. And the professor would be like, you can't put jokes in here. And I'm like, I'm not putting jokes in there. She'd point out things. I'm like, I wasn't trying to be funny. Like, that's actually my point. And she's like, you just need to stop. And I'm like, I'm never going to get it. So clearly there's some level that it's just a baseline for me. And I do think it got me in trouble a lot growing up. But now it's my job. So that works out.
Oh, goodness. Well, Laura, you have the two perspectives. I thought that was so neat. So we go back and forth between Natasha and Ella in your chapters and their different points of view. But I feel like there's definitely some wit and some dark humor there too. Did that just kind of come about naturally, or did you always kind of want to have that in there?
Yeah, in retrospect, telling a story with two first-person narrators, I don't know that I would choose to do that again, because it's really daunting to try to make them feel different enough that the reader isn't constantly like checking the chapter heading and being like, okay, who am I with right now? And so one of the things that I tried to ground myself in was Ella is snarky. One of my narrators has that gallows humor. She's gone through a lot. She's faced a lot of tragedy, and she's just gonna deadpan everything that asks her to be vulnerable. And so humor was something that I kind of tried to fall back on, and that made Ella's voice really fun to write.
Yeah, I was trying to think. There was a really fun quote. I will see if I can find it later. Of the Ella. Let's see, Natalie, I'm going to kind of switch gears here, but feel free if you want to speak about humor, go for it. But I also wanted to check in on like, how is this different for you and for Andrea then? Because we're talking about a series as opposed to a standalone story. In terms of, writing and process for that, did you always know it was going to be a series? Like, what's easier or more challenging about developing a world for a whole series?
Yeah, so a little bit into the humor part first before we get to there. Yeah, I really like to intake like humorous things. So like my favorite movies are like Emperor's New Groove and Zombieland and Pirates of the Caribbean. I really love. And so I think it kind of like when I'm writing, I just like to read about those kind of things. And I like humor in my writing. So it just kind of goes in. But then I'm also a person who like the more stressed I am, like I feel like, yeah, like Lish, like I fall back more on jokes and on humor to kind of like compensate for the panic and anxiety like coming through. So I think that happens with Zaro too, is she just like, her situation just gets so ridiculous. She can't help but like comment on it.
She's very relatable. Yeah, it just comes off very, not easygoing, but you can see, her reaction, and it just, it's very relatable. So, what were you gonna say? Sorry about your series, then.
Yeah, no, she's a lot of fun to write. But with series, like, yeah, there's definitely a challenge. Like, I love series because you get so much more time with the characters. So you really get to see them grow over like several books. And by the end of it, you really feel like you're like a part of the family and like you've been through this whole thing with them. And I really love that. And you can also stretch like certain arcs and plot points over the books that can hit home a little harder. Like there's something about a slow burn romance in a standalone that is excellent and like you love, but something hits different if it takes like 3 books to get there. It just is a little bit different feel. So I love that about series. And then standalones are also great because they kind of force you to do everything at once, and you don't have to think about, oh, well, I don't want to put this moment in here because I want to have something later for the next books. And you can just kind of go wild with a standalone. So I like that. But I think with a series, it's really challenging to make sure you have different character growth in every book, because I feel like at the end of The Kind of Poison, I'm like, they've gone through this thing and they've changed and like that's who they're going to be forever. But it can't be like they have to go through something different in the next book. You can't just keep doing the same arc over and over. They have to grow and learn from what happened in the first book. So to keep that going and to keep that fresh, I think is kind of hard. And then with standalones, of course, you only have so much page time. You have to be sure you get down everything you want in that one book, and make it memorable in that time frame, because you're not going to have a sequel to like boost it back into the limelight the next year. So you have to kind of get all your punches in right away.
Yeah.
Andrea, I mean, you've also done series here. Is that part of the same reasons why you like doing them, or why do you gravitate towards series?
Well, I always think that it's because the foundational works for me creatively growing up were trilogies, like The Lord of the Rings and then Star Wars. I feel like those were kind of the 2 points of reference for me when I was thinking about what are the great stories I love, and they came in threes. So when I first started writing Nightshade, I knew it was going to be a trilogy, and it didn't even occur to me that I could do a standalone book, which is very strange. But that was just kind of where my head was at. And as I've gone on to write additional series, I just find that I really seem to be drawn to that 3-act longer tale. And what I've noticed is that, and I didn't realize it till Natalie was talking about now about how you begin again in a sequel. And I just realized I always introduce new characters in my sequels. And then in the third book, it's everybody from the first book and the second book all get together and they have a grand old time battling whatever needs to be battled in that third book. But I didn't realize that was kind of how I do things until just now. I really actually want to write a standalone, because I feel like that would be a big challenge to me to compress everything into a single book. And I probably should do that instead of just kind of always trying to write series. But I do love the 3-part arc. I just think it's really familiar to me. My favorite of the Star Wars original films was Empire Strikes Back. So I really love that tense middle book, even though the middle book is often referred to as the hardest book. But I tend to really love the middle book, just because I feel like it's where I really, really mess things up.
I do have a quick follow-up for you. Do we know when book 3 will be?
Right now, it's slotted for January 2023.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to come, viewers.
It is to come. It will be there. Yes.
And I think, at least with the world building, all of you did such a beautiful job. And sometimes it's like a series, you get to live in it a little bit longer, but those standalones were fantastic for you guys as well, Lish and Laura. Let's see, we've got a little bit more time, and then we are going to take some questions from our audience. So I don't want to forget about that. You started talking about inspiration there, Andrea. In terms of the future, do you guys have ideas or hopes for where you want to see YA going? Like what stories you want shared and represented? Is that something, of course, you guys will probably be a part of sharing whatever story you would like to share, but as a whole, do you have thoughts there about where you hope YA is going? Lish or Laura, or?
Yeah, well, I wrote this book, kind of part of my origin story for this book was I started writing it as my way of coming out to myself and coping with a lot of questions that I had and not knowing who to talk to. So I thought, okay, well, I guess I'll just write all my angst into a book. And that was so fulfilling personally, but then also having readers DM me on Instagram and say, I feel like I saw myself or I see myself in this book has been really, really fulfilling. And I feel like this was a really good year for queer YA fantasy, which bodes well for the future because I'm just excited to see more of that where, people who didn't see themselves in the past in certain books or maybe could only find themselves represented in, say, like contemporary can now see themselves in fantasy and sci-fi and space operas and everything else. That's just really exciting for me.
That's kind of where, honestly, like where I would go to. I mean, I think in the sense that there have been some really good steps to getting sort of voices that have been ignored more and more into fantasy and everything. And I've had a lot of writer friends that for years have struggled to get their stories out, and they're starting to see them more. I think we have a long way to go. But I think the fledgling steps so far are great. I mean, from a reader perspective, I'm a big nerd for all kinds of different stories and mythologies and worlds. And so like, I agree, I want it all. And so for me as a reader, like this is great. Getting to see kind of new voices popping up. And why sort of learning how to support them along with some of the genres they've struggled with a little bit. Cause I think they've struggled with sci-fi in general. Like I think young adult hasn't quite known what to do with sci-fi, and they get very confused about like funny books, especially if it's funny that's marched into other genres, where it's kind of like, well, we just, I mean, like even just from a marketing standpoint, what kind of cover do we put on that? And I think that if you could have seen some of the mock-ups I got for my first book, where it said like, this is a very funny book, and I said, and it's like very like sad face kind of emo teenagers with which I'm like all for in general, but I'm like right beneath it said this is a very funny book. I'm like, it doesn't look funny. Sad.
I think the cover turned out did turn out nice.
Oh, it's not that way. It was for my first book was years ago. No, Curses. Curses was definitely a cover process. Totally different. There was a lot.
I love the cover for Curses.
They knocked it out of the park. And I think this year in general, like a lot of the covers I've seen coming out are just absolutely gorgeous. Like specifically in like YA, where just stunning covers this year.
Natalie, any thoughts about what you hope to see in the future?
Yeah, so on like a more serious tone, I guess I would love to see more like mental health kinds of things represented in like sci-fi and fantasy. I think we have some absolutely excellent like contemporary books for that, but I would love to see it more in the fantasy space. And then also on a personal note, I want more like creepy fantasy and sci-fi. So if anybody has recs like the Hazelwood, let me know. And if anyone knows of like those more mental health fantasy / sci-fis as well, just like DM me or something. I need to know.
Yeah.
Oh, those are all good thoughts. Let's see, I think we're going to go ahead and do our audience questions. I did have one more silly question, going from important serious topics, to something silly before I jump into audience. But a lot of your books deal with some sort of magic, right? And we've got the whisper ability, Natalie, where we can hear our animals and whatnot. If there was some type of magic or a curse, or if you could curse someone else, is there some sort of element from your book now or from someone else's that you would want in real life? I know that would be hard to limit it, but if there's some sort of ability or mental magic or any of those that are speaking to you, just for something fun to throw it out there, if there's anything coming to mind.
I mean, my answer kind of changes with this because there's a couple of different powers like in my book that I think I would really like. So there's like this speaker in The Kind of Poison. They are able to kind of learn. They live a really long time, like 1,000+ years. So they're able to learn certain other types of magic like during their long lifespan. So I think that would be kind of cool and let me cheat because then I can have more than one. But then also the power that is introduced later, there's this power called like influence, where you can like kind of bend people to your will, which sounds really dark. I don't know. I think, if I'm just really nervous in a room and I just want everyone to like chill and like look the other way, that would be really easy to just like snap my fingers and then, all the attention's off you. But yeah, probably one of those.
Very cool. Anybody else? And it's okay if nothing's coming to mind, but
I don't know if I want the magic from my book.
No?
I mean, so
well,
your options are in my book. You could either be like the magic that's actually handed out by the fairy godlings,
right.
And they're kind of terrible. Like they're terrible people in general, and everything they give you is sort of a double-edged sword. I mean, like Tevin is really charming, but he can't turn that off, which means that he's always charming, and it's almost a relief when someone is kind of like rude to him, because he's like, oh, like fine, because you never know, are they friends with me, are they being nice to me because they actually like me, or is it this byproduct? Omri, it has mimicry, so he can like, which he uses mostly for forgery, but it also means that he sort of remembers everything, and that can be, I think, and the fact that his parents use this power like against him
Yeah.
constantly. Kate has savvy, which is sort of like with Natalie's power, where she can kind of talk people into doing whatever she wants and get sort of a good deal on things. Yeah, I just like most of them, like I said, I don't know if I'd want the
You're
double-edged
good
sword,
without.
the
Yeah.
downside.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Either of you have any magic whims, or Laura, Andrea? If not, no worries.
Yeah, well, it's kind of, it remains unclear throughout Girls at the Edge of the World whether there
Yeah.
are actual sirens or mermaids, or like how much magic is there. Siren is kind of
Yeah.
a term that's thrown around not in a great way, but I personally, outside of the world of this book, love the idea of sirens and mermaids, and I've been watching so much Olympic swimming. And I was like,
Yes. Yeah.
I could have a tail. I'd be okay with that.
Andrea?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the reasons I wrote Nightshade was because I wanted to write a series that kind of worked against the traditional werewolf curse, because ever since I was little, I was like, I never understood how being able to turn into a wolf could be a curse. I was like, that is the most awesome thing ever. And so the Guardians of Nightshade are shifters, but it's a very different thing. Like that's what they think is the best aspect of their life. And so, yeah, if I could do that, I would love to be able to do that. I would love to be able to turn into a wolf. If I could choose, I would probably actually be able to, I would like to be turned into a hawk or an eagle, because when people always ask if you could have a superpower, what would it be? I always choose flight. I want flight. I mean, I feel like it's a really simple one, but I want to be able to fly. I think it would be amazing. So yeah.
No, it's classic flight. That is very cool. All right. Well, thank you for humoring me with that. And now we will switch over to questions from our audience. Viewers, if you haven't had a chance to already ask a question, it's not too late. You can still click on Q&A at the bottom of your screen and add one there. You can also vote on your favorite questions, which is going to bump them up to the top of the list. And we'll go through as many as possible before our time ends today. So let's see. I'm going to dive in here. We've got a question from Aisha. She says, or Aisha, sorry if I mispronounced it. If you could write a novella on one character from your books, who would it be? So maybe we'll go this kind of popcorn style. If someone already knows what's your novella going to be, who's it going to be on, go for it.
I would do one with Val, who's my gunslinger character, because she's just really entertaining to me.
Very cool. Anybody else?
I would pick Teth. Teth is the thief of the troop of adventurers who are going around, because he is my kind of sarcastic, witty, humorous person all the time, and he's been a thief since he was 3 years old. So I really would like to follow some of his adventures and how he came to his current circumstance.
Very cool.
I would do Maya, I think, because she's kind of like the badass, not really assassin, priest, bodyguard person. I don't know. There's just a lot more of her story that I could tell.
Very cool.
I think I would do Nikolai. He's the enigmatic young king, and was a point of view character in the very, very first draft of this book. And I would love to go back to him.
Very cool. Let's see. Donna asks, where or from whom do you get the most helpful feedback from writing your stories? I know a lot of times there's teams, there's editors, there's family involved. So who gives you helpful feedback?
I would say it's kind of a combination between my editor, and then I also have critique partners that I keep really close to me, writers who I've kind of grown up with before I even got an agent, who we would exchange pages all the time. So between those different readers and getting those different perspectives is really valuable, because I don't think there's any one, like I wouldn't feel comfortable just giving my book to like one person and just working with that one person. Like I want a bunch of different people to give me feedback on my work so I can try to edit it and make it make the most sense for the most amount of people.
Mine's a lot like that, with the addition that sometimes there are things that depends on the book, because sometimes I need a target reader, in the sense that like I have 2 books set in Maine. I don't live in Maine. So I gave it to like people who live in Maine who could read it for me, or if it's something medical, my mom looks at it. And then I have certain friends too. If I'm doing more fantasy or more horror, like, hey, could you take a look at this, or things like that. And so it sort of depends on the book, who all kind of. But it's definitely like there's a team.
Yeah, I would echo that. I definitely have writers who I send my writer friends who I send my stuff to. I don't have a working critique group. It's more of when I feel like I want someone's perspective, I reach out to them. And I've been with my editor, Jill Santopolo at Philomel for 11 years. And that's a really long time. And she's become a really close friend. And she was the one who taught me not to be afraid of revising, because my favorite part of writing was always drafting. And then I started working with Jill, and now revising is my favorite part of writing, because she just has such a gift, and I love working with her. I love her feedback. And so I've been really grateful for that relationship.
Very cool.
Yeah, for me, my agent is very editorial, and she always gets what I'm trying to say. And I love that relationship. And also writer friends I found are really useful. I love sharing my work with family and non-writer friends, but sometimes if you haven't like been in the weeds of trying to revise yourself, it's really hard to express exactly what's wrong. You might know the pacing's wrong, but you might not be able to say where or why. So people who've written themselves, I find, are really useful resources.
Very cool. All right. Let's see, Lauren's got a few questions here. For Natalie, she does say, I'm dying for book 3. Is there any news on a potential trilogy?
This is the golden question. I still don't know. The door is still open. But I don't know either way though yet, and I can't say. So
we will have to stay tuned. That is okay.
Yeah.
But Lauren does also have another question, which is super interesting. This is to all of you. Do you take on your characters' moods while you're writing? She says this happens to her as a reader, so she's curious how it would be for a writer. Do you end up anybody thoughts there? Do you take on characters' moods?
I would say I do. I definitely feel really intensely what my characters are feeling. I feel like when I walk away from writing, especially if I've been having a really intense drafting day, it's hard for me to get out of it. I always apologize to people that I see on a day like that, because of like, I'm sorry, I'm not really in this reality with you. And so if you talk to me and I'm just staring off into space, it's not you, it's me. But the funniest thing I think for me that's happened is when I'm writing, I love horror. So even though my books aren't pure horror, I tend to put some very scary elements into them, at least things that scare me, because that's when I don't know if they are scary to other people, but when I am trying to challenge a character, I'm like, what would be absolutely horrifying for me? And I make them do it. So in one of the Nightshade books, they had to go underwater cave diving because I am claustrophobic, and underwater cave diving is like the most claustrophobic thing I can imagine. And so it was terrifying to do. But when I wrote a scene with a very scary beast once, and I actually had to set down my computer and run out of the room because the character was facing off with this hideous thing, and I could see it, I could smell it, I could see the slime dripping from its fangs, and I just was like, okay, no, go away. And my roommate at the time was like, what's wrong? And I'm like, I'm too scared to keep writing my book. And they were like, but you're writing it. And I'm like, I know. So that's what it's like for me.
That is too funny. How about the rest of you? Do you ever take on your character's moods?
Yeah,
I feel like I kind of, oh, you go, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, I think I definitely do. And I try to because then I feel like it's easier to write the emotion into the book too, to hopefully so that the reader is feeling it. And to Andrea's point of writing something she was scared of, I have a different book that it's kind of on the shelf, and hopefully I'll get to it in the next couple of years or so, but it's really a personal book for me and something really hard that I went through. And so there's a point in the climax where I am just bawling as I write this out to try and get it through. And it just and then I come out, my husband's concerned, and it's just like the worst. But that's also how I know that I've got the right words in, because if there are certain scenes where I don't feel panicked, or I don't feel sad, or I don't feel like in love or whatever, then I know the reader is going to pick up on that too. So I definitely try to like get into character, I guess you'd say, as I am writing.
Very cool.
Yeah, I really feel those emotions, I would say, as I'm writing it, but hopefully not after I step away. Like, I like to think of it as kind of a cathartic process where I was feeling something and I put it on the page. And then when I walk away, I feel like I've felt the things I needed to feel, and then hopefully can kind of go about my day and not continue carrying those things, which is always really hard when you have a difficult scene to write and you have to stop in the middle and pick it up again later. That I will definitely carry the emotions around.
Let's see, Lish.
I think I do to an extent. I mean, I'm more likely, I mean, it sort of depends on the emotion. It depends on the scene. For me, it's more of like trying to get that emotion invoked. I mean, like you're saying, if you're not feeling it, then you're probably not getting the scene right, but sort of like trying to connect to that empathy level, trying to, there's definitely times where I've made myself laugh, because usually that's the goal I'm trying for. If it can entertain me, because you spend so much time with a book, and it's just you in the book for a really long time. And I'm like, this has to keep entertaining me for each of the and so I know I make faces while I'm writing, because I've had writing partners who'd be like, what are you doing over there? Because your face. And I've made myself cry a few times, usually if I have to kill a character, which might be why, like, my first book had someone who could bring people back from the dead, because I don't actually like killing characters very much. But I'm like, here, loophole, he can just bring them back. Done.
Thanks. Lish, also, we do have a question from Elise for you. What is something about the writing process for Curses that was different from your other books then?
It was the hardest book. So it was the hardest book, I think, to write, which is funny, because it's also like, I hesitate to use the word fluffy, but it's a romp, and I wanted, like, it is my least dark book, I'll put it that way. There's hardly any blood. It's very strange. People are confused. But for some reason we couldn't get it right. Like, I usually have to do a lot of revisions, but I've never had to like completely rewrite a book. I had to completely rewrite Curses like 4 times and then revise it a few. We just could not. And I think the big thing was, we figured out was, usually in a book there's an A storyline and a B storyline. The original Beauty and the Beast doesn't really have an A. Like, there's nothing really driving the story. It's just kind of, that's why I think Disney added so much to it. Like, we need more in here because there's just not enough. And it took us a depressingly long time to figure out, like, that was part of the problem. And it was also the book that my other books are sort of more like horror, urban fantasy type stuff, and this one is completely fantasy, where we're not based on this world at all, and so everything had to be made from scratch. And on one hand, that's really fun, but it's also very exhausting. But it's just kind of funny to me, like, there's always that idea that like funny books or romances or something are like easy to write, because like they're, these fluffy. I'm like, books are always hard. I mean, there's always that sort of struggle with it. I don't think it matters like what you're doing, but it was the hardest book for me was the one that seems like it should be the easiest, but it was definitely not.
Yeah. This one we can let's see, maybe we'll have one of our series folks answer, but JJ is curious, just for the panel, he does say, is it better to pitch a series rather than a single book? Are publishers more receptive to a series? So if anyone has a thought there, let's see.
I mean, it's you almost can't know, because different editors are looking for different things. Usually you're going to need to have an agent before you ever get to the editor, and your agent is going to be the one who will kind of give you tabs. What I've always been told, and what my own experience was, when I wrote Nightshade, I envisioned it as a trilogy. The deal was for a two book deal, and then it grew from there. And so normally, like, for example, if you were thinking of having like a 6-book saga, which, you know, some sci-fi and fantasy does do, that's not, you can't usually start that way. You usually can't go in and say, I have a 6-book saga, because publishing is a business, and any book is an investment. And if they don't know that 6-book saga is going to, you know, be a success for them, they are not necessarily willing to bet on it. So it's good to have you need to have a story that you can at least put into like 2 books, rather than come at it and insist it has to be like X number of books. But having a really compelling story is absolutely the most important thing. And that if the story is there, you will find editors and agents who are going to work with you to find out what the best form that story should take.
Yeah,
And you're going to
that's
get
great.
more leeway, like if you've been around longer. I mean, like
Yes.
if you've established that you can pull off a series, it's going to be a lot easier for you to say like, I have this 6-book saga, and they'll be like, great. But if you're new, they don't know. There's a lot they don't know about, like how that is going to be to work with you, how the book's going to get received. And so a lot of times what I do is, you know, pitch 1 or 2 books, but have plans for more. So like Curses was pitched 1 book, but you know, if they let me, I have plans for 2 more. And so like that's kind of how I go, and I have to go in knowing that might just be the 1 book and I'll have to move on. And you just kind of, you never really know.
Yeah, sounds like flexibility. You guys have been smart about it, and you have a story that you're excited about. That actually, we've got time for just 1 or 2 more questions, and we're going to wrap up. But do you have any advice then for authors that are, you know, aspiring YA authors out there? Or Laura, this is your debut. How is that for you? Or anything you would tell other authors trying to get their work published?
Yeah, well, I mean, like kind of to the series standalone question, I always read a lot of series because there's so much series. There are so many series in sci-fi and fantasy. And part of me was hesitant when I first started writing to write just 1 book, but it was such a joy to work on something that felt really self-contained, that I could just finish the end of this book. And, you know, maybe I could expand the world if the possibility arose, but like, I loved doing a standalone. It ended up being really fun. And that was something that surprised me. And also, I think I started reading a lot more widely. Before I read a lot of YA fantasy, which is great, but I've started reading a lot more adult fiction and nonfiction, and just kind of dipping my toes in everything, which has been amazing because I'm not just reading books that are like mine, but books that inspire me for things that I want to write about in the first place. And that's why I found nonfiction so inspiring. So yeah, that's the oldest advice that anyone could give you. If you want to write, read, but read and read really widely.
No, it's great. Read widely. Anything else coming to mind? Advice for new authors out there?
I think being tenacious. I mean, like I think spite as a motivation for writing books is undervalued. Because I think you have to have sort of the almost just a really stubborn pigheadedness to make it, because you spend your whole life wanting to do something that everyone tells you is unlikely. And then you have to say, like, well, okay, yeah, you've got a point, but I'm going to keep doing it anyway. And then you have to just sort of keep, you know, sort of repeating that process forever in a sense. Every time you write a book, it's like, well, like that seems like a stupid idea. And it's like, well, but I like it. And so I'm going to keep doing it anyway. And to help with that, I think creating a community to sort of have a support, whether that's a community in your home, whether that's other writers, but people that are there for the bad days where you're like, you know, just really struggling and you're thinking, why do I do this? Maybe I should just, you know, go be a goat farmer, which I did Google at one point. You can buy a franchise, by the way, where I live, and have your own goat farm. I looked into it pretty deeply. Because there are days that are really frustrating, and most of the days it's such a wonderful thing to do, and it's something I don't actually think I could ever stop doing. But just acknowledging that there are those days and they're rough, and having that group that you can text or reach out to, like, hey, just like I need a quick pep talk. Like, can you just give me something positive to keep me in the game? Because it can be really rough, especially if you're new and you're trying to send out to agents and editors, and it's long and frustrating. And so, yeah, spite and good friends, I think.
Like good friends, spite. Tenacious has got it. Okay. Anybody else want to add to our list, or we've got just a little bit more time, or if you're good, then that also works. I'm thinking, bringing it back to your guys' books for one last question. Is there a character that you relate to in this most recent work that you've done? Is there a character that you relate to more, that you identify with more? Do you ever find yourself in your characters or inspired, I guess, by other people in your real life? But
Yeah, so I was thinking about this when Natalie mentioned wanting to see more books that talk about mental illness, and I feel the same way. I have a chronic pain condition and have struggled with chronic depression since my teens. And so those issues are really close to me. And Forged in Fire and Stars is the first book where I wrote a character that suffers from a severe chronic illness. His name is Eamon. And he's a very conflicted character because he is trying to decide whether to do things for the sake of trying to rid himself of his affliction that may not be particularly ethical, or to be to just focus on being a really good person, the best person he can be, and not let himself be dictated by what he feels are limitations he never had before. And that's, for me, when I became ill, writing became an incredible struggle for me because I had cognitive issues that I've never had before, and fatigue that I never had before. So I used to be able to write for 8 to 12 hours a day, 4 days in a row. And I was producing 2 to 3 books a year. And that is gone now. You know, it can barely get a book out a year. And making that, you know, trying to adjust to that and making peace with it has been a real struggle for me. And I found it was very helpful to write a character who was struggling with similar sorts of things. And the more I learned about chronic illness, the more you realize that it's all around you, but no one can see it. And the thing, like mental illness is the same way. And so that's definitely something I'd like to see more of in YA. And it's the first time where I really feel like I put a personal struggle into a character.
thanks for sharing. Anybody else, is there a character in your current book or past book that kind of you identify with or relate to, or has just a little bit of, I don't know, your same sense of humor or tenaciousness?
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably relate to Zaru way more than I'm comfortable admitting, because we both really love chocolate, and we tend to, you know, like I said before, we tend to turn to humor when we're really stressed, and we possibly get a little dramatic when things don't go our way, and things can get out of hand that way. So yeah, Zaru and me, we're like this.
Laura, Lish.
Yeah, I mean, I have these 2 point of view characters, and I think that they both kind of come from different parts of myself. I think that as a 17-year-old, like my characters, I think I was really intense in the way that Natasha is very single-minded. And I think as I've gotten older, I'm a little bit more like Ella, who is just kind of trying to crack jokes to disguise her vulnerabilities. So yeah, they were both kind of playing off of different versions of me at different times in my life, which was fun to do.
That's cool. Very cool. Lish, anybody?
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of a combination. I mean, I think with Merritt, who's, you know, my lead, there's that sort of idea where we have to sort of, at some point when you're growing up, figure out what your path is going to be, and it sometimes is not maybe what your parents have laid out for you. And with her, there's that, it sort of fractures the relationship with her and her mother, which luckily I never have. Like my mom's great, but sort of like going, okay, like this is not, like my whole family doesn't really like this, but this is what I want. And so I liked that about her, but I probably identify more with Val, mostly because she's incredibly awkward and something, like when she actually, like, she meets a girl that she thinks is amazing and is trying to like talk to her and trying to, you know, sort of be like romantic and woo her, but is really terrible at it. I mean, just like, it is not her strong point, and sort of figuring that out and how to figure out what your strengths are to present to another person. And I think sort of get over that, that awkwardness. I think that was me right there.
Very cool. Well, thank you all for sharing, and thank you viewers for your questions. And again, thank you Natalie, Lish, Andrea, Laura for joining us tonight. That was a lot of fun to hear about each of your books and process and all sorts of things. That was just really encouraging to hear from a group of wonderful authors. So viewers, we do want to remind you now that you can still collect, no, you can collect them all, but you can still buy the books by using the links in the chat box. You can definitely check out our website for even more titles by these authors. And as an independent bookstore, we definitely appreciate your support. So be sure to check out our website for upcoming events, and you can follow our Children and Teens Department on social media under @Kids and Prose. And that about wraps up our evening. So we hope you enjoyed hearing again from these amazing authors. Thank you for joining us, and we wish you well and have a good night.
Thank you.
Michelle.